Okay, so this is a audio recording and explanation for the case study titled Telenor Revolutionizing Retail Banking in Serbia, Digital Transformation of the Customer Experience. Now, I'll give you a brief synopsis of the case itself in a very brief way. So in 2013, Telenor, which is obviously a Norwegian multinational telecom provider, they started to decide that they wanted to do retail banking in Serbia. So Martin Navratil, the future CEO of Telenor Banka Serbia, which is basically the Telenor's banking subsidiary, who had experience in banking, this guy was hired and he was supposed to make this disruptive move into mobile banking. So his first task was to make a study of the mobile banking sector of Serbia, and his bosses expected him to put together a plan that would actually help revolutionize Serbia's retail banking market. So in the beginning, he had two major challenges that he needed to handle. Now, this is of course an analysis of the case that I'm actually trying to tell you. So the two main challenges were, the first one was to decide what type of financial service should be launched. The options varied from having a mobile payment service to a mobile only service to having a full retail bank. So these are like more of a spectrum, more of a continuum around which he was supposed to decide what to do. Either he could go for a completely mobile based payment service like Easy Pesa, or it could be a mobile only service which had nothing to do with the bank, or it could go all the way on the other extreme, which is to be a full-fledged bank. Number two, to formulate a strategy for doing so that considered what exactly? It considered the following things, which was positioning the service with a clear value proposition. Now, this is very important. We've been talking about how businesses fail because they do not have a good value proposition throughout various other courses that you've studied. So this is a very important aspect, that you need to have a very clear value proposition. This was something also discussed during your e-commerce case bundles as well. So number two, the market segment that they needed to go after, that also was very important to be identified so that they could target the right kind of audience, and whether to leverage the Telenor's brand or not, or to come all the way with a new brand image, a completely different how shall we say, perception of the brand, that could be a double-edged sword. Why? Because if you were to go actually look at it as a completely full-fledged new venture and not use Telenor's Telenor's brand image to propel you, it might be difficult to establish yourself. On the other hand, if it fails, it also has a bad impact on Telenor itself. Okay, anyways, but that's the decision that they need to make. Developing an outstanding mobile application. Also, obviously you cannot possibly have a mobile banking platform or a solution without understanding the importance of mobile app, or not having a mobile app which is good enough. So that's very important. The product pricing and communication of the entire product itself, and whether to open bank branches. So that was, of course, if they were to go all the way full-fledged into a bank, they would have to open up bank branches. So as Navratil actually considers how to proceed, the case actually provides information regarding the Serbian economy and the banking industry. It talks about the trends in the mobile banking and the market segments and the possible product portfolio that you could come up with, or rather Navratil could come up with. His priorities were to make sure that his plans would be self-sustaining, and obviously to minimize any kind of risk to the Telenor brand. I mean, if it doesn't work out, then obviously it could fall back and have a damaging effect on the Telenor's brand. But if it does succeed, that would be a huge plus point. Regardless, it also needed to be a cost-effective solution, both in the short and the long terms. So this was supposed to be an overall idea that Navratil had to do. So he eventually comes up with this short-term plan that makes all these consideration, it takes all the consideration that we talked about into account, and he creates a positioning focused on a customer and his or her banking needs as opposed to on the product. Now this is again harkens back to the basic idea of marketing myopia, where you're supposed to come up with a product which is a solution to the problem of a customer instead of trying to make a product and then trying to sell it. So this is a very important aspect that we've constantly reiterated in e-commerce, as well as in this course, as well as in various marketing courses that you might have studied. Anyway, secondly, he segmented the market horizontally as well as vertically. So he carefully targeted customers to go after using various criteria. Number one, those who already possessed smartphones, and then trying to target them to use the smartphones for banking, and obviously they are already into mobile banking. And third, he decided to leverage the Telenor brand to benefit it from its strong brand equity. So he also made sure that he did this, and because obviously it was already trusted by a lot of people in Serbia. And fourth, he developed an outstanding mobile application which was very important for customers, and that was the only touch point that customers had with the banking system. And fifth, he also chose a simple product offering, so and made sure that he charged them for every payment transaction. And lastly, he did not bother to invest in any kind of branches, and therefore did not tie up any money in any physical assets, other than those that were necessary for the infrastructure itself. Now, regulatory considerations are minimal because Telenor has already acquired an existing bank, which is KBC, and in order to obtain a banking license but not to keep its customers, so it already did that. So for the longer term, he reasons that the bank will be able to account for all the satisfied customers to popularize its services by word of mouth. So he did not need to actually do any kind of handling of the customers. It was already going to be done because Telenor's brand was strong enough, plus a good service would sell for itself, as well as the bank gradually increasing its offerings such as making loans, so they were also including other products into it, and would require closer involvement with government regulators. Anyways, so that is essentially what this case was about. This is what the case was trying to do. So the case actually tries to teach you how to understand and evaluate the attractiveness of a new business idea. So it's about how a company prepares to enter a market and how to disrupt that market with a new idea. How digital disruption can actually affect the value chain itself. In this case, this is the bank, and obviously jumping into the banking industry using the mobile application as your center point, and how cutting edge digital megatrends are actually changing the way that businesses do their stuff. So how digital is making a change. Now, this is also very important in the current era, considering that the coronavirus being present and all. So it's already making changes in the world in the way that digital platforms are looked at. And so another aspect is the general frameworks of looking at things more customer centrically. So, and understanding that there are various segments within the digital world, and each needs to be approached in a more cost efficient and scalable manner. The challenges and opportunities of any kind of business when trying to come up with a new product is tremendous, and especially true for the digital world, where brand positioning and brand extension are equally important, because they need to be competitive and they need to be unique and they need to be difficult to imitate, because otherwise you would lose your USP very quickly if it's just a matter of coming up with a new idea, because somebody else is going to copy it very soon. And also to make sure that you communicate an innovative mobile offering in the market and make it successful. So those are some of the things. Plus the ability to create a powerful community all around your product, as well as influence the customers through word of mouth. Furthermore, there were a lot of unconventional product and pricing tactics. So the pricing must be simple and needs to be in line with the brand positioning, because obviously this is not a very complicated app or a service or even a product, so to speak. So it's a pay as you go, or it could be two of these. It could be a pay as you go, or it could be eat it all, which means it could be a use based payment system, or it could be a subscription based system where you have a lump sum amount. So it could be in that way. So which one to do? So the products must be carefully selected, and they need to be aligned with it. So that's what they did in this case as well, and they needed to actually focus on that as well. And this is true for almost every digital product that you come up with. You have to decide whether you want to do a pay as you go or an eat it all kind of platform. This is also again something that we discussed in detail while studying e-commerce and similar courses, where we talked about how to create a brand. Now, there are several questions that will pop up in your head that need to be covered while actually understanding this case. Now, the first one is, should Telenor actually offer financial services in the retail banking in Serbia? If it does, what strategic type of financial services, that is M-payment services versus being a mobile or being full retail bank, and what are the risks and opportunities for each? That's question number one. So let's deal with question number one first. Now, keeping this question in mind, you need to talk about and understand that digital disruption is important. As we talked about it, digital trends are disrupting the banking industry especially, and every other industry in general as well. And you will need to also understand how that is happening. So Telenor's key objective was exactly what? Does Telenor want a new service to be profitable, or does it just want to offer banking services as a standalone business, or is it a way to get more customers for its telecom products? So if you look at these possible three things, you would be able to start thinking about what Telenor should be offering. Now, if you were to look at it, these questions would then make you think about the fact, okay, cool, Zabardast, what else can they do to make any of these things possible? They probably need a banking license, which is necessary for it to happen. So if Telenor wants to be profitable, it must offer a payment solutions and a loan solution at some point, because for that you need a banking license. Otherwise, if you're not a financial institute, if you're not a bank, you can't really possibly offer those. You could only just be a payment solution through mobiles, and that's it. So what exactly does Telenor, do you think, has to offer? Now, obviously, the most obvious one is that they will need to apply for a banking license, which will obviously take some time in Serbia, because that's how things are. You will never get a license straight away, especially even in a country like Serbia. It will take time. So Telenor wanted to enter the banking market to create a profitable standalone business that is better than all other offerings that are already there. That is what they were trying to do, right? That is mentioned in the case. So Navratil's mission, which was also pushed by Telenor senior executives in Norway, was to make a profitable bank within 5 to 7 years and to revolutionize, as the title of the case itself says, revolutionize the retail banking in Serbia. So this would obviously mean that other options such as being a service provider or being a peer-to-peer lender would be out of the equation. Now, we need to understand that this is not going to be a simple thing. There's going to be a lot of risks. There's a lot of issues involved, and you need to keep on thinking about those. Okay, as a telecom company, what exactly are the issues that they will have to face, how they'll deal with them, how they will have to handle them. Those are all the risks and opportunities that they'll have. There'll be several other players in the market that could easily replicate this model. Other telecom companies in Serbia, maybe other banks would make partnerships with telephone companies and then come up with similar solutions. So you have to keep all those things in mind. Now, which of the 6 segments should Telenor target, and are there potential sub-segments within the attitudinal segments that you could have identified? Now, this is what this case also poses as a question. Now, this is the second question. Now, for a general discussion of segmentation, we need to look at appendix number 4 and ask ourselves what variables could be used to segment the banking market, with respect to the pros and cons of each. Example, the strategic versus the tactical versus the actionable and non-actionable. So there are several ways in which we can look at that, and we need to look at exhibit number 4 to be able to do this. Now, if you were to look at the exhibit number 4, we will come up to the different kinds of examples given up in the case itself that actually talk about the different categories and segments of customers that we can deal with. Now, for Telenor, a number of those different segment strategies were already available. Now, they could make decisions based only by thinking about all the other things that they could also think about the brand strategy, the products, the channels, and all. But we could just focus on the segmentation strategies themselves. Now, a lot of people will start thinking, maybe they should just be a payment service provider or just be a peer-to-peer lending provider, since there's no risk to the Telenor brand in that case, and Telenor could target every customer that is interested in that service, so you don't even need to bother about any particular segment, and then scale the business from the start to a larger scale using that. Now, you could say that maybe a better idea would be for Telenor to become a full-fledged retail bank. And they would say that would be the biggest segment, because obviously the banking industry is pretty large and there's a lot of people that could be called in to be part of their new system, and that could be a good idea. So the debate on the segment size is very important. That is, you need to understand that if you want to scale a business, you need to go after larger customers, or you could focus on a smaller segment and then scale from there. So according to you, some of you, maybe you'd be like, okay, let's go for segment number 5, which is the biggest one, which is the banking industry itself, the larger, be a full-fledged bank, and then focus on them. Or you could ask yourself about the kind of problems that they would, face in that scenario. Now, in the case is page number 14, appendix number 7, it talks about reputation being online, the security, the safety, all of these things would be important, and they would also be important for segment number 5. Okay. So this is mentioned in appendix number 7. So in addition, in appendix number 6, which is page numbers 12 and 13, it shows the kind of that kindness and competence of the staff would be a very important aspect if you want to focus on being a bank. Now, it also indicates that a mobile-only bank is not an option if you want to go for the biggest segment. So if you want to go for handling the biggest segment, you can't just be a mobile-only option. You will need to be physically present to be able to capture the largest chunk of the market. So obviously this indicates that a mobile-only option is not sensible if you want to go for the bigger market. Now, also only 38% of the people in this segment actually have, which is the banking segment as a whole, actually have a smartphone. So obviously because reputation is important for them as well. Telenor would not want to create a whole new brand that nobody's aware of, and then trying to build up that brand would be a bad idea. That would be too much of a risk. So at the other extreme, students, usually think of the fact that maybe segment 6 is a good idea, which is because it is a very small one and 71% own a smartphone. So segment 6 talks about focusing more on the mobile offering. Now they usually, people who tend to agree with that part say that testing a new mobile offering in this segment would be a good idea. But if successful, it could be rolled into other segments. If not, we could stop right there. So another segment would be the one that already has smartphones. So that's a 71% segment. So you could always, try and get into that segment first and then expand from there. Anyways, or you could stop if it doesn't work out. So you would avoid any kind of risk of any kind of brand dilution or brand weakening. Now this is a good thinking, obviously, because brand dilution is something that is a huge risk, as was mentioned in the case, and they wouldn't want Telenor's brand to be affected too much if this whole banker thing fails. Anyways, so the question of whether of the difference between the segment 3 and 6 therefore arises, which is that on the surface they seem to be very similar, because in terms of general attitude and perception, as actually described in exhibit number 4 in the case, that is, they would use loans, they would like risky investments, they would like challenges, and they would like adventures. So there are lots of similarities. However, with careful scrutiny of the perceptual map that's also mentioned in exhibit 5, you would understand that one is more preferable in the proximity of segment averages to the attitude and perceptions judged most important, which is to say that you need to focus more on the averages rather than extremes of any kind. So the same is true regarding aspects of experience maps. Now, so there are two different maps that we're talking about: perception maps and the experience maps. So exhibit number 6, which is based on page which is mentioned on page number 14 and 16, you would understand that in segment suitability, in that preferences are lower priority in segment number 6. Anyways, so another point regarding the banking in Serbia is that Navratil needed a segment that gives money, that is actually saves money in the system, and a segment that borrows money. For this reason, they decided, at least in the case of Telenor's banca service mentioned in this case, they went with segment number 1, which is those who are savers, who will be saving up money using these platforms, and segment number 3 and 6 are people who are going to be borrowing money, who are supposedly loan seekers. So that is something that we need to look at. So it is very crucial to understand that segmentation plays a huge part when coming up with these kind of businesses and coming up with these ideas. So Telenor chose to focus extensively on mobile phones. We know that, and they were open to change though, but they focused more on the mobile phones. So they realized that there is a limited potential, but they knew also that there is limited risk here. So they were playing it safe. So Navratil actually says it in the case. He says, my dad would never sign up because he wants to talk to a person. So by opting for a mobile only, it made clear who it didn't want as a customer. So they didn't want non-tech people as part of their solution or as the part of their customers. And they also made sure that people who signed up wanted and indeed were likely to love mobile banking. So they weren't focusing on converting people from physical banking toward mobile banking, but rather were trying to answer those customers who actually needed mobile banking as a new platform or a new touch point, as a new way of doing their banking. So besides the vertical segmentation based on attitudes and behaviors, Telenor also brought in a horizontal layer, which is smartphone ownership as their criteria. So as discussed later in other discussions too, there's another aspect. Telenor also wanted to leverage the brand for this new market entry. They wanted to minimize the risks, which was a very big aspect on their entire strategy, and they also wanted to make sure that other segments that could have been interesting were also something that they would consider at later on, such as the segment with lower penetration of mobile phones. They also wanted to understand that they were worried about the risk of brand dilution. So segments 1, 3 and 6 were not that big, and if the offering didn't work, the dilution or the damage to the brand would be lower. So that's why they preferred those segments. Anyways, so the third question is, what could the brand positioning actually look like? What brand pillars should Telenor actually focus on? So the first pillar that they should focus on and they should be positioning for is to first understand that what exactly the posting strategy would be. So they needed to have a frame of reference. They needed to understand what their brand actually meant. So Telenor wanted their offering to be more unique. It needed to be differentiated from the competition. It needed to be different from what everybody else was offering in various ways. So this, of course, relates directly to the segments, so that we already talked about. So the important idea here is they needed to make sure that the customers that they're targeting were not only unique, but that their brand would to be considered trustworthy, for financial services. And obviously they needed their customers who are already used to using smartphones, who are already trusting smartphones and other platforms, other products and services that are already being used from those cell phones. So they needed to look at their brand positioning was supposed to be more about uniqueness as well as about the trust issue. So they were going to go with those two brand pillars. Question number 4. Should Telenor leverage its brand or come up with a new brand to avoid the risk of brand dilution? Now, we've already talked about this, but let's discuss it more in detail. So trust was a huge factor for banking customers in Serbia, where the economy was still recovering from what had happened in the 1990s, which was the entire Bosnia, Herzegovina, Czechoslovakia and Serbia's issues. So we've already studied that in various other geopolitical studies courses as well as history courses. But if you don't know about it, you can go study about it. It's the usual issue that happened with the country being split in 3. Anyways, so the senior executives were constantly asking how they could ensure that the customers trusted a telecom company when it came to financial needs. Now this is similar to the kind of problems that Telenor's Easy Pesa had to handle during Telenor and Tamil Microfinance's joint venture of Easy Pesa. That was the same problem. They needed to actually convince customers to trust a telecom company with banking needs. That's not that simple. So it was very clear from the beginning they wanted to make sure that they use the Telenor brand, which already has a recognition, it already has people's trust in it, and then use that. So it was a trade-off between there is a great potential and there's a risk of diluting the brand. That's always the case whenever you're using a strong, well-recognized brand and using that to be your jumping board for a new brand or a new product. It's always risky. Anyways, so by far the most important revenue stream would be coming in from the telco business, and they needed to make sure that that remains protected. That is, if the banking product fails, the telecom business does not suffer, and they don't lose out the cash cow that they already have. So Telenor wanted to have a quick and cheap exit option from the banking. If it didn't work out, they needed that to exit. That's why they focus on a mobile-only horizontal segmentation and layer. So they focused only on those who are mobile users, so they could always walk out of it. Because if you, if you're a failure with your brand name, if you're a failure for the larger banking industry, for even non-smartphone users, that's a disaster. Okay, so they didn't want that. So anyways, you needed to understand that this needs to be connected with the earlier discussion about there is a lower risk of brand dilution because only tech savvy people would be signing up, since that's the focus segment. We've already talked about it. So this decision also impacted the brand positioning and the brand pillars that Telenor could leverage. Navratil argues that offering would almost certainly have failed if it offered under a new brand, because obviously you would need to create a new brand awareness and you need to create a more stronger reputation, and then need to be done from the scratch. And since there are over 30 competitors in Serbia, that would be very, very difficult, if not impossible. So in Serbia, Telenor was widely known as a very reliable network for the telecom services. It had a lot of high awareness, they had strong brand equity, so it was making sense that they would leverage their brand and would go with the name Telenor Banka, like they did in Pakistan, which was Telenor Easy Pesa. And that makes perfect sense. So what would be the risk of brand dilution if it did not work? So again, this is linked to the other questions that we talked about. By combining a small tech savvy segment with a great mobile app and strong positioning, Navratil made sure that the customers would almost certainly love the brand and the product. That is why he insisted that the app be outstanding, which is not very good, is not enough. That's what he says. So you needed to make sure that the app was absolutely amazing and absolutely user friendly and useful, because this was the only way that the customers could see you. See, this is usually the problem that was also discussed multiple times in e-commerce under different headings and under different contexts, but it's the same idea. See, it's very easy to create your brand image when you have some physical assets to show, whether you have a physical bank branch or you have a department or an office or whatever. Creating your brand image, and a strong brand image is that, for something that is actually virtual, that is not physically seeable, touchable, feelable, so to speak, is very hard. So the only touch point you have is your app. That's how you know Google, that's how you know Amazon, that's how you know Alibaba and AliExpress. It's their apps, but you trust them because of their really good apps and the services that they provide. So that is your touch point. That is the make or break platform. So this is why it was very important, and Navratil made sure that the app is amazing. So hiring the right people so that they could collaborate with the right firms was also important. So you needed to make sure that you had the right kind of people that would make good alliances with other businesses, so who would then be on board with using this app as their payment platform. And ultimately the product was supposed to be really a solution to a very specific target market, which it was, and they loved it, and that is why they were able to make money from it really well. So question number 5: how could Telenor bring the offering to life through different marketing mix decisions? Now that's again related to our marketing idea. So the questions that you could have here, or you should be thinking about here, is how should the actual product look and feel? What would be the ideal way to communicate it? How would you actually allocate resources across earned versus paid versus owned media? Whether you do it through organic means, whether you do it through paid means, or paid means through other third parties, or through your own platforms, maybe through your telecom services. What would be the message that you're trying to get across? What product and service offers make sense to promote? And should Telenor have branches using existing telecom branches, or have no branches at all in order to reach the customers of this particular platform? And how should the new financial service actually be priced? So now these are some questions that are all related to the 5 P's that we talk about in the marketing mix, right? So there are no right and wrong answers to these questions. You need to start thinking about those things. You need to start thinking about those things with respect to Telenor itself as a brand. Now this is what actually has been talked about, and what actually happens in Telenor's case is something I would recommend that you go out and study, but don't let that be the guide to your solution. Don't go to what happened and try and understand whether these were good decisions or not. Your decisions in any case analysis should be focused more about the information available and how that particular organization uses that information to make its decisions. You as the case analyst has to understand that you're limited by the case itself. Yes, you can read left, right, center, everywhere, but you need to understand that your decisions must be based and focused on what is mentioned in the case. You can use different strategies, you can use different models, different frameworks, different ways of looking at things, but do not use information of what happened to make a decision about your own strategies. Okay, you can use them to evaluate whether your strategies were good or not, but you need to look at this. Anyways, so this is the essentially what I would want to talk about this particular case. So that's that. So good luck with this case.